My name is Russ Durstein. I am the Texas Concerned Veterans Coalition Director for Concerned Veterans for America. We are honored to have you here tonight. I see many veterans in the room. We're very pleased to have you. And thank you. And we want to give a couple of thank yous real quick. Otis Woodfin and the Vietnam Veterans Chapter, they did a wonderful job of loaning us their trailers so that we could bring over from John McElroy and Troy Crosby the VFW post flags. We'd like to thank them for letting us be able to do that. That's a real honor. How many of you are pleased with the facility and the awesomeness of this room? We want to thank the Heights Church. I'd like to call Dr. Miller to come up and join me for a minute. And we want to say thank you. Your church, your staff has been absolutely wonderful, absolutely lovely. And we'd like to ask you if you would say a few words and lead us in prayer.
Will do. Thank you. Well, we're blessed, Russ. We're blessed to have all of you because you're the kind of people that we are, and we're excited about that. I hope you've made yourself at home. If not, it's your own fault. Restrooms are across the way. Whatever you need, let us know and we'll help out. Joanne Schotten has been our contact person. Joanne, wave your hand back there. She's done all the work. And it's nice to have somebody who does all the work and you get some of the credit. It helps. Let's go to the Lord in prayer. Lord, our hearts are filled with an abundance of gratitude for the unnumbered blessings you've poured out upon our nation and upon our people. Father, I pray that you'd forgive us when we forget that you're the giver of every good thing that comes in our lives. We ask you to keep us focused. Remind us of the grace you bestowed upon us through your Son, Jesus, and the opportunity you've given us to build a great nation under God with liberty and justice for all. Tonight we're thankful for our form of government that allows us to elect representatives who share our value system and who treasure our national heritage. Especially are we grateful for Senator Ted Cruz and his firm commitment to biblical principles in the Constitution of the United States. And God, thank you for smiling on Texas. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen.
In the U.S. Army, and I was an OH-58 Delta Kiowa Warrior helicopter pilot. You slowly start to see the blades move and you hear the engine lighting. It has the most amazing sound ever when you start a helicopter. I loved it. I loved flying. I can't believe that was my job for as long as it was. I thought that I knew what honor and service meant before I went into the military, just with my upbringing. But I had no idea until I actually served and saw honor and service for myself that I truly understood the meaning of it.
I was 23. Yeah. We got hit by a Claymore mine, my platoon. Then when the Viet Cong thought we were helpless, they came out. One I saw aimed his rifle at me, missed my head and shot my toes off. That hurt a little bit. My RTO and my medic who were between me and the mine got killed. Jimmy McCormick was my RTO. He's one of the people that are heroes in war that people never acknowledge because they're always carrying the radio next to the commander. And they're the whole means for us to communicate. Honor is Jimmy McCormick. He was truly a hero. He saved my life.
So I graduated, went to officers training school. Then I was going to go to aircraft maintenance school. A non-commissioned officer in charge said, "Sir." I said, "Yes, Sarge." He said, "You have been alerted for Vietnam." A month later, I was going to Vietnam.
It was very difficult. We had 2 young children at the time. I guess they must have been 3 and 1.
I was so blessed because my wife, my family, and my 2 kids prayed for their dad every day. Service is a team effort. As together, everyone achieves more. You protect each other.
After I returned home and got out of the military and hung up my uniform, I still felt the need to defend everything that I'd fought and sacrificed for. There's still a lot of work to be done in America.
I'm 76. They could call me and I'd go again, because it's worth fighting for.
You know, America is not perfect, but she's the best thing we have. And we ought to love her with all our heart.
Thank you, veterans. Thank you so very much. Concerned Veterans for America is a group, is an organization where your service can continue. The very things that we fought for, we sacrificed for, that we believe in, still have to be defended today in the United States of America, and that's what Concerned Veterans for America is about. For might be the most important part of our name. But I want to describe to you, we were born in 2012, and CVA in Texas, Concerned Veterans for America in Texas, started in 2014, and I was the first field director in the state of Texas. And so with this in mind, the video you just saw, it was my duty to go out and to recruit veterans, veteran family members, supporters of veterans, to get the word out about what we're trying to accomplish in major issues for veterans, namely VA healthcare reform. And so my job in December of 2014 was to attend the Armed Forces Bowl, find a volunteer that would go with me, multiple volunteers. We had an ice storm, and I could think of one person who'd be willing to answer that call and go to the Armed Forces Bowl and get the word out about who we were. And so she ended up not only going to the event, she actually stuck around and volunteered more and more and more. Eventually, this volunteer became a part-timer for us, and as she continued to grow, we gave her more and more responsibility. And then eventually she ended up becoming a full-time staff member in September of last year. She is a retired Air Force veteran who's very proud of her service. She's very passionate about what she does at CVA. And she is the best field director, not in CVA and not in the state, but the entire country. Why do I say that? Because the executives at CVA say so, because our state director says so, and because the impact that we have on getting laws passed are done by field directors like Leslie, who is the best there is. She and her volunteers, of which she has 100, 66 of those have engaged on the phones and the doors to make 61,000 phone calls so far this year, talked to 12,600 constituents. Those are citizens just like you and I, and have gotten them, many of them, to patch through to talk to their senator or their congressman and say, we need your help on passing VA healthcare reform. So Leslie's hard work paid off in her trip and her ability to go to the VA Mission Bill Signing Act at the White House. And we'd like to honor CVA's best field director tonight, Leslie Beecham. Leslie, would you like to come introduce your volunteers?
Thank you. Sit down. Thank you so very much. It's a privilege to be here, and like he said, it's a privilege to continue to serve our veterans, and I'm going to start crying. And like he said, this is a passion for me. So when I call to ask for volunteers, it's my passion. So if you would like to volunteer with Concerned Veterans for America, please let me have your number, and I'll make sure you get called. And I would like to introduce you to some of our volunteers that are with us tonight. So go ahead and if you would please stand. San Angelo volunteers, we've got San Angelo and Abilene volunteers with us tonight. So go ahead and stand up for me, please. These are the volunteers, and we've got some that are over, Roy. These are the volunteers, and some have also been here from when I started volunteering. So thank you very much. I'd like to also mention one specifically, Miss Vera Kirkpatrick. She's our volunteer coordinator, and she has been, well, we call her Mama V. So she's been our mother hen. She's been the den mother. She's been everything for us. So whenever we need anything, she's here for us. So this is...
Served since 9/11. Countless tours of duty. Raise your hands. We want to thank you. My son has served since 9/11. He's still serving. I have a special place in my heart because when you go and your child is there, you'd almost rather be yourself than to have your child in harm's way. So thank you guys very much. Now, join these folks. Please stay standing. Those of you who are military spouses, you serve as well. We'd like to have you stand. If your husband or wife is with us or not, we would like for you to stand. We want to say thank you. You keep us going when we're serving. Thank you so much. And then last but not least, if you're a family member, if you have a brother, father, son, anybody like that supports us while we're there, I cannot tell you how much we look forward to hearing from you and seeing you when we're serving far away. Please stand up and join us. We're going to do the pledges. We want to say thank you to you as well. All right. Thank you. At this time, we are going to do our pledges. And so if you will join Leslie, she's going to lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance to the American flag.
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you so much. Ms. Vera Kirkpatrick, would you lead us in the Texas Pledge? I pledge allegiance to thee, the Texas flag. I pledge allegiance to thee,
Texas, one state, under God, one and indivisible.
Leave it to me to mess up the Texas Pledge. Sorry, Texans. I've only lived here 33 years. I used to know it well. Please be seated. That's what happens when you quit doing Texas events and let somebody else lead them. So thank you all tonight for your patience. We want to thank you all for being here tonight. You have seen the CVA question cards go around. Has anybody not gotten one that wants to submit a question later on? Okay, I see no hands going up. If you change your mind, raise your hand. We'll have a staffer come bring you a card. The purpose of tonight's event is to further discussion on providing the nation's heroes and with the benefits that they earn through their service to our great country. We understand that you all have many questions on this topic as well as other topics. We will get to as many of the written questions as we can from the audience tonight, and those that we can't get to, we will hand over to the senator's staff so that they can answer those questions for you as soon as possible. So at this time, I'm going to stop speaking. I'm going to introduce to you the gentleman who will introduce our honored guest tonight. Dan Caldwell is the Executive Director of Concerned Veterans for America. He's come down from headquarters in Washington, D.C., and a man that I admire very much, Dan Caldwell.
Thanks, Russ. Like Russ, I'm from Arizona, and when I was in the Marine Corps, I served with a lot of Texans. And one time, one of my best friends from the Marine Corps told me, "You're from Arizona, huh? That's like Texas light." So, we don't have our own Pledge of Allegiance, but thank you, Russ. As Russ said, my name is Dan Caldwell. I'm the Executive Director for Concerned Veterans for America. I've been with Concerned Veterans for America for close to 5 years now. I'm also a veteran of the United States Marine Corps in the Iraq War. Hoorah! It's an honor and pleasure to join you all here tonight in San Angelo and to spend time with Russ, Leslie, Eric, and all our dedicated activists. For those of you who have been volunteers for us, I want to say thank you. Your efforts have been critical to success of Concerned Veterans for America, and you all played a key role in passing major pieces of VA reform legislation, like the VA Accountability and Whistleblower Protection Act, which made it easier to fire bad VA employees, and also the passage of the VA Mission Act, which will hopefully give more choice to our veterans. Tonight is a continuation of a series of events that we've been holding since 2012 called Defend and Reform. We have done these events all across the country, from Washington State to New Hampshire, with everyone from state legislators all the way up to presidential candidates, and we've done them with members of both parties. Tonight we are honored to be joined by Senator Ted Cruz. Senator Cruz has been a real champion of veterans on Capitol Hill, and his office has always been a pleasure to work with. Before Senator Cruz joins us on the stage to discuss some of these important policy issues, I want to lay out some ground rules for tonight. First of all, to be clear, this is not a campaign event. I understand we're getting close to an election that's very heated and there's a lot of stuff in the news about it, but we're here to discuss policy, not politics. Secondly, we expect everyone to be respectful and civil. Listen, I was a grunt in the United States Marine Corps, therefore I'm bilingual. I speak English, and I speak profanity. I can handle yelling and salty language, but we aren't in the barracks, we aren't in the field. We're here to have an in-depth and serious conversation about some important issues. Therefore, if you disrupt the event anyway, you interrupt the speakers, or you're disrespectful to the speakers or anybody else in attendance, we're going to ask you to leave. As Russ said, we're going to collect questions so that you'll have a chance to engage with the senator. If you could please fill out these question cards. Russ and others are going to be collecting them. From there, once I'm done asking my questions to the senator, Russ is going to be asking questions from the stage. He's going to ask people to stand up and ask their question. If you're not comfortable, Russ will ask them for you. But we collect the question cards, so if we don't get to your question, we're going to hand them to the senator's staff so you can get a response back. That ensures that you are ultimately, at the end of the day, getting information you need to be an informed and active constituent. Finally, I just want to say again, I can't thank you all enough for coming out tonight. We hope that you will all join us eventually as volunteers and activists with Concerned Veterans for America. I've been proud of what we've accomplished over the past several years, but at the end of the day, we wouldn't be as successful as we are without our grassroots army. You all who volunteer for us, you're the tip of the spear. What we do in Washington, D.C., all the meetings that we take, Kelly Merkel, who's one of our legislative liaisons, we wouldn't be able to go in these offices and meet with senators and congressmen if they didn't know that we had a grassroots army back in their state and districts. And out here in San Angelo, we have one of the biggest. So again, thank you. We know back in Washington who really has the power, and it's the grassroots. So thank you all for your time. So with that, I'd like to go ahead and welcome Senator Ted Cruz to the stage. Thank you again for joining us. Thank you again for joining us, Senator. So to start out, this is a question that I ask of all elected officials that we do our town halls with. And one thing that I tell veterans and service members when they are having a problem with the VA or any other federal agency, one of your best resources is your senator's office or your congressional office. So can you tell the audience, if they're having a problem with the VA, the DOD, or any federal agency, how they can get in touch with your office and what type of services you provide?
Well, sure, I'm happy to. Let me start, Dan, by saying thank you for hosting this event. Thank you to Concerned Veterans of America. You guys do a tremendous job advocating for our veterans. You play a big role in policy making in Washington. You play a big role on the grassroots, on the ground, and I'm grateful. And let me say to everyone here also, especially to those who are veterans, let me say thank you. Is it? All right, is this mic not? All right, how about this? Well, we'll switch from one mic to the other. As I was saying, what I wanted to say, especially to those of you who are veterans, thank you. Thank you for your incredible service. Thank you for standing up and defending this nation. We are free. We enjoy the rights that we have because each of you stood up and defended those rights. And so the entire state of Texas and the entire country is grateful for your service. Now, Dan, your question about dealing with the VA, dealing with the federal government is a maddening experience for many people. And in my office, the Senate office, we have a staff that is dedicated every day to trying to help Texans navigate the federal bureaucracy, to trying to help Texans deal with the alphabet soup of agencies in Washington and get through what sometimes can be maddening red tape. We have, in the last 5.5 years, directly assisted over 15,000 Texans with specific constituent issues, including over 4,500 veterans who've had issues specific to the VA or other veterans issues that we've helped navigate. I want to take a point to introduce Mary Whistler. Mary, can you wave in the back? So Mary is the Deputy Director of our West Texas region out here. Mary's job, she works for you. And so I want you to know, if you're having an issue, if you're facing frustrations dealing with the federal government, reach out. You can reach out to Mary. You can also, if you go to our website is cruz.senate.gov, and there are links that'll put you directly in touch with someone on our team. And we spend a lot of time just advocating for Texans, but also trying to help just navigate what can be the frustrating leviathan of federal government agencies.
Well, thank you, Senator. And again, I used to be a congressional caseworker back in Arizona. This is a non-political office. I know that Senator Cruz and every member of Congress, Republican, Democrat, does not check political affiliation at the door. So if you disagree with the senator and you need help, please utilize his office. So thank you for sharing that information.
Well, and I will note in my office, a number of the caseworkers have been there many, many years and even decades. And in fact, one of the very first things I did when I was first elected in 2012 is the day after the election, I called my predecessor, Kay Bailey Hutchison, and I said, Kay, with all your constituent service team, please extend to them directly from me an invitation. They shouldn't feel like they're suddenly out of a job because somebody new got elected. Everyone that has experience and is good, we want to talk to them and keep them in place. And so we've got people who have been doing this 10, 20, even 30 years, and so have real experience navigating the challenges that can be the federal bureaucracy.
Well, thank you again. So now diving into some of the policy. Over the last 18 months, President Trump and Congress have passed a lot of legislation to reform and fix the VA. I talked about some of the bills earlier, the VA Mission Act, the VA Accountability Whistleblower Protection Act, the fixes to the GI Bill, the appeals process, a lot of progress that we frankly didn't see under the previous administration. Do you think that the VA is heading in the right direction under the Trump administration? And do you think this legislation that you all have helped pass will help the situation at the VA?
Well, I hope so. And you're right. In the last year and a half, if you look at Congress and what's passed, we've had 18 different bills pass out of Congress and be signed into law, designed to impact and improve the care and treatment of veterans. You highlighted, I think, two of the most important, which were the Accountability Act and the Mission Act. All of us are familiar with the scandals we've seen in recent years of VA facilities wrongfully denying care. In some instances, keeping fraudulent, even phantom books so that it appeared that vets were receiving the care they were owed, and at the same time they were not. That was wrong, and it was completely unacceptable, and the VA Accountability Act was all about providing accountability, providing leadership with the ability that if you have VA employees who were wrongfully denying care, who were keeping fraudulent books, the authority to terminate them. And in my view, anyone that is wrongfully denying care should be dismissed, and if anyone has committed criminal conduct hiding that, they should be prosecuted. And any time you say that, you have to acknowledge that there are many, many wonderful professionals at the VA, many of whom are veterans themselves who have devoted their lives to providing care for veterans. And so that, we need to be grateful for the good efforts they're doing, but at the same time ensure that there's accountability. And we obviously have a new VA secretary. I'm hopeful that Secretary Wilkie will be able to, utilizing the tools of the Accountability Act, make sure that you're keeping real records and that you're demanding accountability and that veterans are receiving the care that you deserve. The second bill you mentioned, the VA Mission Act, I think is every bit as important, if not more important. And to my mind, the most important reform that we need to see concerning the VA is a widespread expansion of veterans' choice. I believe every veteran ought to be able to choose your own doctor. Now, it may be that you make the judgment that you want to go to the VA. Maybe the VA in your community has expertise. Maybe it's a combat-related issue. Maybe it's something that you think the VA does the best job in this care. If you want to go to the VA, you've earned the right to do that, and you need to be able to continue to receive that care. But maybe, on the other hand, you want to see a cardiologist at the hospital down the street. That ought to be your right to say, listen, there's another doctor I want to go see, so for this particular type of health care, I'm going to choose to go elsewhere. And the value of choice is, I think that's the most potent tool for improving the quality of care and the speed of care in the VA system, is empowering veterans to have the ability that if you're not receiving the choice that you want and deserve, the care that you want and deserve, that you have the ability to go elsewhere. Now, the VA Mission Act made serious steps in that direction. It expanded the Choice Act. Now, it was just signed into law a little over a month ago, so it is going to take a little bit of time to actually be implemented and see the results, but it was designed to significantly expand choice, to get rid of things like the rules before requiring that there be no facilities within 40 miles or the 30-day rule. Both of those significantly limited the breadth of veterans' choice programs. And so I'm hopeful the Veterans Mission, the VA Missions Act, when implemented, is going to produce very significant reforms and empower veterans to have more control over their own health care.
Well, we couldn't agree more, Senator. And we'll be monitoring the implementation of your Mission Act and, of course, working with your office to ensure its intent is honored. So, again, we couldn't agree more with your answer there. So I want to shift to a more issue that you are trying to address legislatively. So about a month ago, the Office of Personnel Management, which is like the best way to think of it is the HR department for most of the federal government, released a report that said that there were 472 VA employees on taxpayer dollars working full-time for government public sector unions. So they were working 100% for unions on taxpayer dollars. This was an increase from 2015, where you had 350 employees working full-time for government unions like the American Federation of Government Employees, AFL-CIO, and so on. Overall, VA employees devote about 1 million hours to union time on government time, which is called official time. This is all while you have hundreds of thousands of veterans across the country still waiting long periods of time for health care. So that's a tremendous amount of time and resources that goes into activity. You've sponsored a bill with Representative Arrington, who's just north of here, called the Vet Protection Act that would reform how these work. Could you tell us a little bit about this bill?
Well, sure. As you noted, look, all of us want to see the maximum resources at the VA devoted to caring for veterans. That's the central mission of the VA. We don't want to see lots and lots of VA employees spending their time on political activities, on activities that are separate and apart for caring for veterans. The stat you just gave a minute ago is really a stunning stat that each year VA employees spend over 1 million hours each year on union organizing, union official activity rather than caring for veterans. That is an enormous amount of time. And so what this legislation does is it seeks to focus that time and energy and those taxpayer dollars back on caring for veterans. And so, among other things, what it does is it says you should not be spending official time on the taxpayer dollars engaged in political activity, engaged in lobbying. That should not be on the official dime. Beyond that, it limits any individual employee should not be able to spend more than 25% of his or her time on the union organizing activities. That's at least 75% of the time should be on actually caring for veterans. And so there's a place for union activity within the organization, but 1 million hours a year is too much. And then what the legislation also does is it says for the higher paid employees, for doctors that are making $100,000 a year or more, that they should not be devoting all of their time to union organizing. If you've got a doctor that's making six-figure, that doctor needs to be caring for patients and not doing political activity. And as you noted, Congressman Jody Arrington has introduced the same legislation in the House, and so we're both working to pass this.
This legislation also served as the basis for an executive order that President Trump signed back in May that would attempt to implement some of this through executive action, but it's being challenged in court. So ultimately, I think we're going to have to address it legislatively. So we're going to be working to advance this bill, and hopefully we'll see it signed into law one day. So one last question before we bring Russ back up to help moderate some of the questions from the audience, and this is on a defense-related issue. You have been a big advocate of auditing the Pentagon. It's been something that we at Concerned Veterans for America have supported. For the first time ever under the Trump administration and Secretary Mattis, the Pentagon is attempting to complete an audit. Can you give us an update on the progress of that audit and when you think it will actually wrap up?
Well, you're right. It's a fairly stunning thing that most people don't know, that an enterprise as large as the Pentagon doesn't have an audit. I mean, think about it for a minute. If you run a small business, let's say you own a car wash, you know, most small businesses, you have an audit. You have a CPA go through the books and make sure the books add up. You have an entity of $600 billion a year where they can't tell you where all the money's being spent. That is maddening and it's unacceptable. And so I've served for the last 6 years on the Senate Armed Services Committee and have pushed consistently to audit the Pentagon. We've had provisions added to federal law moving towards an audit. We're expected to have the initial results reported later this year. It's expected to be perhaps sometime in November. Now, I think it is virtually certain that there are going to be audit issues, that the entity is so huge, if you have an entity that hasn't been audited, that is at that size, it is not going to be, I am certain, a clean audit. And to give a way of reference, it took the Department of Homeland Security, a much smaller agency, a decade to get a clean audit. But The virtue of it is, by auditing the Pentagon, by finding out where there's waste, by finding out where money is not going where it needs to, that means we can allocate the resources where we need to allocate it, which is to our troops and to our readiness and to defending this nation.
So, an interesting audit fact: in the Army's first phase of the audit, they found 38 Black Hawk helicopters they didn't know they had. They weren't on the master inventory list. Just for comparison, the Japanese Army has 34 Black Hawk helicopters. So that's quite already the audit is yielding results, and we're very happy to see that going forward, and thank you for your advocacy on that. So with that now, we're going to get to your questions.
I'd really like to know whose backyard they were parked in.
That's a good one. With that now, we're going to have Russ help moderate our questions from the audience.
Let's switch mics real quick. Senator, I can't tell you how thrilled we are to have you here tonight. Folks, this is going to be your turn. I'm going to ask Gabriel and Matt Healy to be ready. We're going to come to you first. So first of all, we'd like to ask you a question from a grassroots point of view. These are the activists in the room, all the CBA volunteers here. As you heard earlier, we have a field director that's made over 60,000 calls with her staff. 12,000 constituents have been talked to. We've gone to vets on the Hill. We've gone to local office districts. Some folks get discouraged because they see their elected officials say one thing and get elected to do something else. Can you give us an honest evaluation of what it's like when the grassroots come together and they come to an office, they come to the Capitol, they make those calls? What does that feel like in the Capitol?
Well, Russ, let me say first of all, thank you for the terrific leadership you provide, and I'm grateful for all the hard work you put in for veterans. It is difficult to overstate the impact that the grassroots can have, the impact that constituents holding elected officials accountable can have. I think back to 2013 when I was newly elected to the Senate, and you may recall I did a filibuster on Obamacare.
Yes, sir.
That was 21 hours, but the impact, by the way, I have to just take a digression. The most frequent question you get asked is, how do you handle going to the bathroom? Particularly when you talk to kids, that's really what they want to know. And I will tell you, by the way, Rand Paul had done a filibuster earlier in the year. He gave me 2 bits of advice. He said, number 1, wear comfortable shoes, and number 2, drink very little water. And between the two, number 2 is the best advice. In the whole 21 hours, I had one tiny little glass of water, and so that helped. But look, the impact of that was not standing on C-SPAN for 21 hours. The impact of that was millions and millions of Americans picking up the phones and lighting up the switchboards and going and holding their elected officials accountable. I will never forget one of my colleagues in the Senate Republican lunch literally made a fist and pounded the table and said, "My constituents keep calling me." I found myself completely speechless at that. But it has a powerful, powerful impact. And so I want to thank you for organizing on the grassroots, for being, one of the great developments, and it's particularly with the internet, is that citizens are much more informed now. So, it used to be that politicians could go and jump on a soapbox and give a speech and then go to Washington and do the exact opposite. It's now much harder to do that, and it's harder to do that because the grassroots are educated, are informed, and know the facts, and if you're talking out of 2 sides of your mouth, you're going to be held accountable. So I want to thank you for the hard work each of you do standing up and fighting for our veterans and standing up and fighting for our rights.
Thank you, Senator. Gabriel has a question about the distances that have to be traveled.
Right.
Let me hold the mic.
Okay. I've been going to Audie Murphy, San Antonio for 30 years. They made me come back to Big Springs, and they send me to Albuquerque, which is a 1,000-mile round trip.
Wow.
They wanted to operate on my kidneys, and I said, there is no way I'm going to have an operation in Albuquerque, and have to drive home another 500 miles after the operation. Took him 2 years to get me an local appointment. And it's a good thing that I had it here because I had problems with my operation. And there was no way I would have been able to drive back.
Well, So I'm sorry, sir. I'm sorry you dealt with that frustration. Let me say thank you for your service, and thank you for sharing that story. That's exactly the sort of delays, the sort of unreasonable policies that legislation like the VA Mission Act is designed to address. It's designed to say you have a right and you should be able to choose. So if you're not getting the service and care you need from your VA, you should be able to go somewhere else, and you should be the one making that decision. It shouldn't be some bureaucrat saying you got to go to Albuquerque. It should be you saying this is the doctor, this is the health care, the hospital, the facility that I want to go to get the care I need.
Thank you. Matt has another question about local services.
We could have written the exact same question. And the reality is the men and women here that have served deserve to be served.
Yes.
That's the reality of it. With that said, I am a vet and had a very good friend who had the exact same situation living in San Angelo and was forced to drive back and forth to Albuquerque numerous times to the point where he could no longer do it and had to move to Oklahoma where he could get medical care through the Veterans Administration. Not an acceptable situation, and I don't think a lot of the folks in Washington realize what these men and women are doing to keep us free. We need to take care of our vets. Thank you.
Sir, I emphatically agree. I am hopeful with the VA Mission Act you will see more choice, and I can tell you this, I'm going to continue pressing in Washington until we have full choice in the VA so that it is you, the veteran, that makes the choice about your health care.
Excellent. Daniel Dice, where are you at? Daniel, would you stand up? Nicole will come to you right up front here, Nicole. Daniel has a question about e-benefits.
Well, sir, I filed an appeal to my original claim back in 2013, and we bought a house, we moved in the middle of the appeal process. I went to the Texas Veterans Commission, I changed my address. I went into the e-benefits, I changed my address. VA sent a packet to my house that required a 30-day response. They sent it to the old address. When we did research, well, they ended up closing my appeal. We ended up doing research and finding out that the appellant side of the VA is a completely different system. So when we changed my address, they never got it. So I had to appeal them closing my case, reopened it finally, and I'm over 4 years on an appeal and still have no idea where I'm at on the appeal. So my question is how can we ensure that that database gets updated all the way across the board for anybody?
So that's a great question. Let me say again, thank you for your service, and I'm sorry for the frustration. That's maddening to deal with it. Has it gotten resolved now? Okay, so it's still pending. So I'm going to ask several things. One, I'm going to ask Mary to follow up with you to see if our office can be helpful getting that straightened out. Secondly, I've got Brant here. Brant, wave your hand, who's my military legislative assistant. I want to look at the policy issue of when you file a change of address on one system, it not getting over to the appeals. I mean, that just seems stupid. And that's the sort of thing, I mean, that's different from we will work to try to help your case, but beyond that, we ought to change the system so if you file at one place, it's reflected elsewhere, and so you avoid these problems. So I'm going to ask Brent to follow up with you also to see what we can do with the VA. I can tell you one piece of legislation that I've introduced that is also pending and that we're working to get passed is legislation that would require the VA on the health side to have a chief information officer. And they don't have a chief information officer right now, and that would do a number of things. Number one, it would help with record keeping and electronic health records. Number two, it would provide much more transparency and accountability to avoid the problem of shadow and bogus bookkeeping, because if you have a CIO who is focused on the information, and this is something that would also fall within a CIO's responsibility, is saying, okay, if we've got updates, if we've got new information, let's make sure it's populated in all of the relevant areas. And so that, I think the legislation could help, but we're also going to look on if there are policy improvements the VA can make directly to address that problem.
Our next question is from Susie Smith.
What can we, as the general population, meaning the non-military, do to help our veterans get the help they need? They and their families have put it all on the line for us. What can we do to move Congress to give them what they need?
Well, I'll tell you, Susie, you're doing it now. By being here, by being involved with Concerned Veterans of America, by speaking out, by putting your voice behind it, that has a powerful impact. And let me say also more broadly, so I spent much of the afternoon at Goodfellow Air Force Base and just touring around, meeting with the senior leadership there. And as you know, they do incredible work at Goodfellow on ISR, on fire prevention. But one of the things that is so powerful for Goodfellow is the incredible support the San Angelo community provides to that base. I will tell you, one of the senior leaders there talked about how he had been stationed at bases all over the country and he'd never seen a community embrace a military base the way the San Angelo community does here. That was a powerful, powerful testament. And let me say, that's important also. That is important, and it's one of the consistent things about Texas that I think there's no state in the union that loves, that values our active duty military and our veterans the way the state of Texas does. And so there's all sorts of things. For example, we were meeting and saying, you know, one of the issues at Goodfellow they had was in training dogs in the hot summer, it was too hot to train them outside and they need shade. And the problem is building shade for dogs didn't rank very high in the ranking for military construction. So they couldn't get the funding to build the shade to train the dogs. Well, what they're doing, folks from the community are chipping in to build the shade to train the dogs because that needs to happen also, and it wasn't rising up the rankings. And then that's just one example of how the community can embrace and value both our active duty military, our reserves, and our veterans.
All right, Linda Martin, you're going to go to...
Actually, hold on. Let me
sir.
jump in and talk about something else related to this, which is in recent weeks, we also had a big announcement for Texas, which is that the Army announced that they are basing the Army Futures Command in Texas, in Austin.
Wow.
Now let me tell you what exactly that means and why it's such a big deal. So the Army Futures Command is a new command being stood up that is charged with modernizing the Army, modernizing our weapons system, modernizing our war fighting, modernizing how the Army deals with threats in the 21st century that are changing and will continue to change dramatically. And there was a national competition to see where the Army Futures Command would be. At the end of the day, it came down to, it was Austin, North Carolina was in the mix, and then Boston, Massachusetts. And so this is something I spent real time on my end, leaning in vigorously with the Secretary of the Army, with the Undersecretary of the Army, making the case for Austin. And I'll tell you, the pitch I made to the Army, as I said, listen, there is, of all the places you're looking at, there's no place that comes close to Austin because, number one, you've got a pool of talent coming out of UT every year of engineers and scientists and young talent that can help provide what you need. Number two, you've got an incredibly robust tech community in Austin. You've got startups that are coming, growing like crazy. But number three, I said there's no state in the union that values, that supports, that stands with the military like Texas. And the pitch I made is none of the other cities can combine those three the way that we're doing it. Now, let me tell you what this means. It's going to mean, and this was a pitch I leaned in vigorously, Governor Abbott leaned in vigorously, we worked together between federal and state, and the UT system leaned in vigorously. In fact, they have now given the Army the top floor, the 12th floor of the UT Systems building, so that the Army Futures Command is going to be there. Not only that, but the Capitol Factory in Austin, which is a large center that's an incubator for high tech, Army Futures Command is going to have, I think it's 25 or 30,000 square feet right there with the tech startups and the venture capitalists right there on the ground. That's going to mean 500 jobs immediately. But much more fundamentally, it is going to mean literally billions coming into the state of Texas as we see companies and startups coming here who want to design new systems, who want to be part of the future of the Army, of the future of war fighting in decades to come. One of the things the senior leadership of the Army said is if you fly into Washington, D.C. by Dulles Airport, and you look around, there are tons of high-tech defense contractors all around there. And what the Army was saying is they said, I guarantee you in 10 to 20 years, you'll come into Austin, and it'll be just like that. You will see all those companies growing up, all those high-tech jobs, because they want to be by the decision makers. And critical to getting the Army Futures Command here is the incredible support that our communities provide to the military. That was something that I was able to say, look at what Texas does when we have the military here. And you know, they were looking at Boston. I'll confess, I asked the Army, I said, what, Elizabeth Warren's going to be your champion?
Senator, if you have time, we've got two more questions. We'll try to be pretty close. Debbie Cross has asked me to read her question. It's about the VA Accountability Act. Debbie helped us call on that and get that passed. We understand a lot of the VA employees have already been fired. What kind of impact is that having, and what do you see the future of accountability?
Well, it's probably early to know for sure, but you've got over 1,000 employees who've been terminated under the Act, and then that sends a message throughout the system. That sends a message that this is not just a job that you can shirk your duties, that you can neglect the care that veterans are due and escape consequences for it. And to date, most of those who have been terminated have been relatively low level on the org chart, and I think there needs to be accountability not just at the lower levels, but up at every level of anyone who's complicit in wrongfully denying care. And that will remain, I hope and believe, a major task for the new VA Secretary, who I hope will continue to insist on that accountability up and down the chain.
Thank you. I'm going to take kind of the privileges of being the host here. Vera Kirkpatrick, who you heard about earlier today, her husband of 65 years as paratrooper. We just lost him a couple months ago, great volunteer. But Vera's having issues with spousal benefits and some of the same mazes that the veterans have to jump through. What is the future of trying to clean up some of the spousal benefit maze that we face?
Well, let me say I'm sorry for your loss. Thank you for your husband's service. Well, and that is indeed true, but we are also grateful for your service, because when he was serving, we also know the prayers, we know the love that you had for him, that your family had for him. And I will say, so often we take the time, thankfully, to thank our active duty military and our veterans, but we often neglect thanking the spouses. We neglect thanking the kids whose daddies or mommies are gone for months or years at a time, and it is very much a family commitment, and we are grateful for the families of every veteran who are here. I will say, as you asked, look, right now, spousal benefits, I think it is unfair that you have an offset of one spousal benefit program in DOD being offset against another spousal benefit program in the VA. That doesn't make any sense. And I can tell you this has been an issue I've been actively discussing. There are others on the Senate Armed Services Committee that are actively discussing, that are working to find a way to fix it. The challenge in this last NDAA was finding an offset that would cover the cost of fixing that problem, but my hope is that we will fix it because we need to be treating surviving spouses with the care and the respect and dignity that you're deserved and that you're owed.
Senator, I understand you have time for one more or one or two, or what do we, I defer to staff for a second. I don't know what your travel plans are.
Sure, we'll do three.
We'll do three, okay, very good. Linda Martin, where are you? Linda, okay, Linda's over here. She has a question. Linda, would you stand up? Do you want to read your question, or do you want me to? Okay, very good, Linda. I'll hold it, you go ahead and talk.
As a Vietnam Gold Star wife, I was blessed to marry another vet. In the last 8 years, I have watched him go through open heart surgery, quadruple bypass, carotid artery surgery, other conditions brought on by Agent Orange, and he has had to fight the VA all the way in the last 4 years to try to get benefits. And it has been frustrating to him, frustrating to me to watch him. And it's not right, Senator, it's not right that our guys are having to fight to get what they deserve. He was told back in November about the hearing aids? In November, he needed hearing aids. Yes, Mr. Martin, you have a hearing issue. Well, we're still waiting. It's not right.
So, ma'am, let me say thank you for your service and sacrifice. Thank you for your sacrifice in your first marriage and your service there, and we are grateful we are sorry for your loss, but we are grateful for your service and sacrifice. And thank you for, sir, your service and your continued service to our nation. I agree with you. And one of the things that I'm going to ask again is Mary to follow up with you as well, sir, to see if we can help with dealing with the consequences of Agent Orange. You deserve the care you've earned. And it is, if you're not getting it, that needs to be fixed. And so we're going to try to help on that front. I will say, if you look right now at veterans returning from active duty right now, there's a potential new issue that has the potential to be another Agent Orange, which is open burn pits. And the consequences, the health consequences of that, we don't fully understand, but it has the potential a decade or two or three from now to have enormously detrimental health consequences. And so I'm a co-sponsor of bipartisan legislation to monitor and keep as part of periodic health assessments whether you were exposed to an open burn pit, so that we can assess and make sure, if we are seeing very significant health consequences, that those vets are getting the care they deserve, because again, it's the right thing to do, as it is with respect to Agent Orange.
I just would say real quick, just for my fellow Iraq and Afghanistan vets, if you haven't signed up for the burn pit registry, please go ahead and do that. Again, even if you don't like the VA, it's important you sign up, so please do that.
And actually, on that
While the senator's looking, Robert Schaaf, would you raise your hand so we know to come to you? Okay, Robert, thank you. And Elizabeth Barr.
Here, I just want to take a minute on that point to give you the place you can go to register is https://veteran.mobilehealth.va.gov/AH burn pit registry. And let me suggest right now, Brent, I have a very simple solution, which is let's get a simple damn website to go and register. Here's a very simple test. If you cannot read the website aloud without eliciting peals of laughter, then you've done something wrong in setting up the website. But again, please do go and register, and I feel confident also CVA has a place on your website to find that link, and if you don't, you guys can probably get it up.
We'll make sure to post it on our Facebook and Twitter. And
Good.
Two quick questions, but they sometimes are the trickiest. Robert?
Yes, sir. I'd like to know if and when we are going to get any competent, real doctors at the San Angelo Clinic. Some that don't go to sleep while they're talking to you, or that you can understand when they tell you something, that they can speak somewhat close to a language you understand.
Well, sir, I'm sorry for that frustration. I will say one of the things I've found all across the state is the quality of care varies widely. Hospital to hospital, institution to institution, even doctor to doctor. So often when I'm doing town halls, I'll ask folks, in fact, let me ask something here. In the last year and a half, how many of y'all think that the quality of care at the VA has gone up? I mean, you guys are dealing with it. Okay, so that's interesting. All right, so we have, but so that varies geographically. I asked that question day before yesterday, and about half the hands went up. So it varies, I think, quite a bit geographically. That can be frustrating if you're in a community where that is not the sense of the vets dealing with the VA. I think the best solution to that is expanding choice. And we've talked about that a lot, that if you're going and you don't understand what your doctor's saying and you're not getting the care, well, then you ought to have the right to go down the street to another doctor in another hospital. And part of the virtue of competition, listen, I believe in competition. I believe in competition across the board. I believe in competition in healthcare and education, just about everything, because by having competition, I think that'll be the most powerful thing to improve the quality of care at the local VA, because if they don't, they're going to lose all their patients. If care is not meeting your needs and you have the ability to go elsewhere, you can vote with your feet quite literally, and that puts an incentive in that no mandate from Washington saying you must do better care, that's not going to solve the problems, particularly when you've got such geographic variation. What's going to solve it is empowering the patients for you to make the decision. Nobody is better situated to assess what quality care you're getting than you are, and so I think you ought to have the power to choose.
Thank you very much. Last question we have for you. And folks, if you want a chance to meet the senator, we're going to ask you to line up in the middle here in just a second. We're going to take a picture with all the volunteers that helped put this together. So this center aisle here is going to be where we congregate to line up. So please do that in an orderly manner. Elizabeth Barr has a question for you that I think is unique and powerful.
Name one dream you have for our republic.
Name a dream that I have for our republic?
For our republic, yes.
We'll pretend we didn't hear that.
That liberty continue to flourish. And let me take that question as an opportunity to share really what have been my twin passions and loves in life, which have been the American free enterprise system and the United States Constitution. And both of them, for me, trace back to when I was a kid, when I was growing up in Houston. I got very involved in a group, it was a nonprofit group called the Free Enterprise Education Center, where we studied free market economics. We read people like Milton Friedman and Hayek and von Mises and Bastiat. And as high school kids, we'd give speeches on free enterprise and how the American free enterprise system has been the greatest tool for combating poverty the world has ever seen, has been the greatest engine of opportunity the world has ever seen, has allowed more people to come from nothing and achieve anything than any system the world has ever seen. And then that nonprofit also created a group, it was called Constitutional Corroborators. And it was 5 high school students, I was one of them, who we spent hundreds of hours studying the Constitution. We actually memorized the Constitution in a shortened mnemonic form. And we would tour the state of Texas, and we'd speak on the Constitution, and we would start, like we'd go to a local Rotary Club or a Lions Club or Kiwanis Club, and while everyone was having lunch, we'd set up 5 easels, and each of us would write the Constitution from memory in a shortened mnemonic form. We would then write a definition of socialism under the principle, if you don't know what it is, you can't identify it when you have it, and that was government ownership or control of the means of production or distribution in an economy. And then we would write a quote from Thomas Jefferson. If a nation expects to be ignorant and free, it expects what never was and never will be. And that, I gave something like 80 speeches all across the state of Texas in high school on free market economics and the Constitution, and it was the beginning of really what I wanted to do with my life. And let me mention one other piece of that's kind of the beginning of the intellectual foundation, but all of us at the end of the day, what really matters is where your heart is, where your gut is. And every one of us, we're the product of our family story. We're the product, we stand on the shoulders of giants of those who preceded us. For me, a huge part of that is my dad. And some of the folks here may know my dad. He's been out here quite a bit. My father was born in Cuba. He grew up in Cuba, and as a kid, he fought in the Cuban Revolution. When he was 14, he began fighting in the Cuban Revolution. He actually fought alongside Fidel Castro. So he didn't know Castro was a communist, and none of the kids fighting did. What he knew was that Batista was a cruel and oppressive dictator. And when he was 17, Batista's army threw him in prison and tortured him. And my dad fled Cuba in 1957. He came to Texas. He was 18. He couldn't speak English. He had $100 sewn into his underwear, and he had been admitted to the University of Texas. And he got a job washing dishes, making 50 cents an hour, paid his way through school. Now, my aunt, my tia Sonia, who was my father's younger sister, she was still in Cuba. The revolution succeeds in 59, so 2 years after my dad leaves. Suddenly, Castro declares he's a communist. He begins seizing people's lands. He begins executing dissidents, lining them up and shooting them. My aunt, my tia Sonia, fought in the counter-revolution against Castro. So she was on the other side from her brother because she saw that they went from one abusive dictator to an even worse abusive dictator. She was imprisoned and tortured by Castro's goons. And my tia Sonia and I are very, very close. She lives in Dallas, actually in Plano, north of Dallas. And growing up, my cousin Bibi and I, Bibi is Sonia's daughter, the two of us used to literally sit on the floor in the living room and listen to stories from my dad and my aunt, telling stories of fighting in the revolution. And when I was a kid, when I was 2, 3, 4, 5 years old, what I wanted to do was fight for freedom. And so when you ask for a vision for our republic, what we have in America is unique. It is special. For most of the history of humanity, this has not existed. And when I was a kid, my dad used to say to me all the time, when we lost our freedom in Cuba, I had a place to flee to. If we lose our freedom here, where do we go? Look, that's why every one of you is here. That's why those of you who serve step forward to serve. And that's what is so extraordinary and exceptional about our republic is the freedom we have that has to be preserved. And so I'll tell you, it is an unbelievable honor to have the privilege of representing 28 million Texans and going in every day to fight for the free enterprise system, to fight for opportunity and jobs, and to fight for the Constitution, because ultimately that's fighting for the freedom that is unique and precious in the United States of America.
Well, before I hand it over to Russ to close us off, I just want to say I've done dozens of these events of elected officials. I don't think I can think of a time where I've had an elected official say, no, I want more questions from the audience. So I can't tell you how much I appreciate that. So I think that's a great question to end on. Thank you, Senator. I'm going to hand it over to Russ to close us out.
Ladies and gentlemen, I want to thank you for coming. There are two key things that come together when great laws like VA accountability get passed, the Mission Act, expanded VA choice. It's activists like you who take a stand, and elected officials like our champion and hero, Senator Cruz, that's willing to vote on those. I want to thank both of you together. That kind of teamwork makes real change. Will you stand with me, and as we close tonight, and let's give the Senator a hand and thank him for coming out tonight. If you